gas has made for more than its fair share of inflammatory headlines. Some see it as a key to the US becoming energy independent, others as a major environmental threat, and some have even suggested it should be a cause for concern for the Middle East oil producers.
Well, I recently met up with Justin Dargin, a Gulf energy expert at the University of Oxford, and asked him about how the UAE can utilize shale oil and gas technology.
The UAE has several natural gas fields where the gas is complex to produce. So these are tight gas fields. So in 2012, ADNOC had undertaken a feasibility test, basically to analyze whether shale gas technology would be able to be used or deployed in these tight gas fields. And the preliminary results were actually quite good. So ADNOC is quite optimistic that this can be used. And what that would do is it would increase the domestic gas production in the UAE. So that would be positive. Although I think the long-term threat, though, for the Gulf region and also the UAE is in terms of the petrochemical sector. So what we see is in the US, we see massive amounts of investment funds that are relocating to the US to the tune of about $77 billion in petrochemical projects. And about 110 petrochemical projects have been announced. And so we know that the UAE and other Gulf countries have staked their diversification strategy on the downstream gas industries, so the petrochemical sector in particular. So this is a long-term competitive threat, we would say, to economic diversification efforts in the UAE.
Now, there is some concern when it comes to shale wells, that they do start up quickly, but they also peter out quickly. Has the shale revolution been overstated?
Well, I think that some of the optimism has been a bit perhaps misplaced. We still have yet to see where this shale gas and shale oil revolution is going to end up within the next 10 years or so. So, I mean, there are several issues with that. One, of course, is the maturity of shale gas or shale oil reservoirs. So they do mature quite quickly, and that is an issue that I think needs to be dealt with. So shale gas reservoirs tend to have a very rapid uptick in terms of production, but then production declines typically quite quickly after initial production. So that is an issue. Another issue as well is environmental concerns with shale gas and shale oil reservoirs. So with hydraulic fracturing, or what is known as fracking, many local communities are concerned about whether some of those chemicals that are used will seep into the local aquifers or what have you. So this environmental concern is becoming greater and greater within the communities that are producing shale gas and shale oil. So what this would potentially cause in the U.S. is it might create increased regulation for shale gas and shale oil operations, which of course would increase the cost of production as well.
Now, there is a lot of debate on the topic of subsidies here in the country. When it comes to these subsidies, is this something that you think is holding our energy sector back?
In terms of subsidies, though, the UAE really doesn't have subsidies for natural gas or oil. It's not really subsidies per se. The thing is, for oil, for instance, the lifting costs are extremely low, and what happens is the UAE tends to grant oil that's domestically produced at the cost of production, which is lower than most other countries, and which, of course, is below the international price. And the same for natural gas as well. So this is one thing that many international observers, I think, don't quite understand, is that the UAE doesn't really subsidize its natural gas production or the allocation of natural gas or that of oil. It's just that the costs are so low within the country, it doesn't meet the international price.
Now, even if consumers are buying oil and gas at a cost, more or less, this still cuts off additional revenue that could be had by selling our resources abroad. What are your thoughts on this issue?
Demand has increased exponentially. I mean, so we have about 9%, or at least domestic demand is reaching 9% per annum until 2020. At least that's what the trends look like. So increasing the price of domestic energy resources, so oil and natural gas, would lower demand. And it would lower demand in the immediate sense. I mean, by tomorrow, if you increase prices today, it would lower it tomorrow, and that's guaranteed. Although you have to be very careful, though, as to what the proper price would be, because you don't want to shock consumers and also many of the large companies that are operating in the region by increasing the price several-fold. So perhaps you want to use a multi-staged approach whereby you gradually, incrementally increase prices to lower demand. And also what it would do is it would also work to attract IOCs to be able to increase natural gas production as well.
So for next week's World Future Energy Summit, what do you think will be the big topics of discussion, the big issues?
The big topics, I think, energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, and energy efficiency is very important at several levels. Energy efficiency is important for meeting environmental goals, important for our climate goals as well. So in terms of carbon management, very important for lowering energy consumption within the country and also globally, and also becoming much more competitive. I mean, so there are many ways that you can look at energy efficiency, and that's what I think is going to be one of the most important topics at hand. And this also relates to what the UAE is looking at the moment in terms of lowering its own domestic energy consumption. So energy efficiency is going to be something that's going to be looked at from many different angles.
There's certainly some major